David, I don't know if you heard anything that we just went through, but we'll go back because we need your actual votes.
Just nod yes.
The only nomination for vice chair was some dude named Larry Dodson. And everybody in the room voted for him. So what about you and Carl and Julia? Are you guys, what's your vote?
Yes.
Yes.
You hear me, Carl?
Yes.
Okay, you vote yes for Larry as vice chair?
Yes.
All right, so while you were away, or while we were away, David, you were nominated for chair, and I think you're the only nomination for that office. Are you willing to serve?
I guess so. If they have that much confidence in me, I do.
All right. So, any discussion or any other nominations? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I'll need you guys individually to do it. Carl, Julia,
Aye.
thank you. We have our chair and vice chair reelected. David, I'll turn it over to you. You have the agenda in front of you, I assume. So we have, let me just let you know, David, we have Interim Commissioner Kinney in the room. Brian Perry is in the room. The only person who's not in the room is Rhonda Sims, and she and Jennifer will be doing the assessment piece virtually.
Okay. Well, the agenda says to elect a chair and vice chair, which we just done, but
That's correct.
But the second item on the agenda is remarks and facilitated open discussion and feedback. And we have Interim Commissioner Robin Kinney to speak with us, I guess.
Yep, she's right here. Rhonda, or Robin?
Robin?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair Webster. It's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. David asked me to come and just talk a little bit. So he didn't give me a lot of indication on what I was supposed to talk about, but I thought it might be helpful first if I share with you sort of my background and how I got to this position. So I've been at the Kentucky Department of Education for, I call it 2 tours of duty. My most recent one, I've been there for the last 8 years as the Associate Commissioner of the Office of Finance and Operations. And so I've worked with, I believe, as I look around the room, all your districts on issues related to whether we're talking about SEEK funding, we're talking about buses, we're talking about buildings, we're talking about audits, school and community nutrition, all those things that we do to assist local school districts in your operations, your day-to-day operations and finance. In that position, I also have responsibilities for similar roles over the Kentucky Department of Education. So my office was responsible for preparing the biennial budget request, which we know most of that money is really we are requesting on behalf of our local school districts that comes to you, or for partners that we engage in services so that we can support local school districts. So that's what I did prior to this position. The Kentucky Board of Education asked me to fill in an interim capacity as the Commissioner of Education until we find our next permanent Commissioner of the Department of Education. And I'm happy to report to you we are underway with that initiative. We just today heard at our Kentucky Board of Education meeting from our executive search firm that's going to help us find candidates and vet those candidates, do the background search, help us arrange interviews, and move us forward toward that in that selection process. So I'm very happy that it finally feels like we're underway. We will start planning sort of the format for that. We have reached out to lots of advisory groups, and I don't know if the member has come and met with this group, so I'll throw out. There were actually 2 questions, and maybe we can be a little interactive here. and I'm going to ask Brian or Jody to help me capture thoughts. There are two questions that we have, Kentucky's board members have gone and asked all of our advisory groups. What would you like to see? What qualities would you like to see in the next Commissioner of Education? So that's the first question that we've been polling all stakeholders about. And the second one is, what would you like that new commissioner to tackle in the first year that he or she is the new Commissioner of Education? So a very important time that we are in, finding that next commissioner for the department. So does anyone have any thoughts that they'd like to share, either in person or online, about what qualities you think are important for our next commissioner to have?
I've got a statement, not necessarily just question one or question two, but just what I think Madison County would like to see is a commissioner that is just focused on core curriculum, not social issues. Because I think that gets the muddy waters with legislators. If we could just focus on core educational issues.
Core educational curriculum.
I think that's the most important thing with our kids, even the ones that are graduating. I was talking to a gentleman, actually my former, was coming out, did a quote for me, and he's got a boy that graduated 2 years ago. And I spoke to this kid's class at Madison Central, and he's like, listen, our kids don't even know how to write a check. They don't know how to fill out envelopes. They need basic core educational stuff we used to do. I mean, I remember in elementary school, we had to learn how to write an envelope. You know, in high school, you had to learn how to fill out a check. Kids don't even know how to do that anymore. We need to get back to the basics instead of going out and conquering the world's social issues. Let somebody else teach that. Let us teach the core basic educational issues that we need.
Okay.
We need to go back to the 80s, the 90s. And truthfully, I think that's what we need to do. We need to get education back the way it was and learn basic foundations, because kids graduate today and they can't do anything.
And they don't let things stay long enough to see if it'll succeed.
Yes.
If it doesn't succeed in the first year or two, here they try something else or try something else.
You know,
But what you were saying too, I agree, we're not teaching kids. An example is, my husband has been involved with this golf course, and there was a girl there that had graduated from college, but she was working out the golf course, and she's as a nursing or health degree or something. And so we have a friend that's a doctor here in Louisville, and we talked to him, and he said, we need people, send her to us. So we sent her to him, and they interviewed, and she said, so at the end of the thing, she didn't want to starting out, she wanted to be up as supervisor, not realizing you have to go through the steps.
Yeah.
We're missing teaching that too, somewhere in the career and college focus, somewhere that's not being taught. And we were just shocked.
It is interesting that our students today are very different than in the 80s. I can say that because I'm a product of the 80s. I graduated in 1982, so I'll share my age. Kids today are very, very different than we were back in the 80s. I think a lot of it is due to this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's due to this. So what does this do for our kids? It gives them immediate information, right? So if I'm looking for information, all I have to do is, and I said this at the board meeting, I'm not going to ask Siri or Alexa, because she's going to spit right back at me and say, So we have to instruct differently, because kids can just pick this up and find out. They don't need to memorize or spit back answers because they have it at their fingertips. So we have to teach kids how to learn, how to think critically, how to be able to collaborate with others, how to get along with others, how to look people in the eye and communicate with each other. All of these things. And we are going to have enough time at the end, because David's going to talk about portraits of a learner and the full council, because that's part of their focus. We can't go back to teaching like we taught in the 80s. I think the other thing that is different with our students and really with our staff as we've come out of the pandemic, We have two really big challenges right now. We've got lots of challenges. I don't want to just drill it down to two, but two really big ones. That's teacher recruitment and retention. We've got to have the high quality staff that are in our classrooms to create those vibrant learning experiences. The other thing that we're really struggling with right now is chronic absenteeism, where students are not coming to school. And we can build the very best system of instruction, including those core instructional needs. We can build the very best, have vibrant learning experiences, hands-on learning, exciting. But if the kids aren't there, it's all for naught. So we've got to also focus on student absenteeism. And there's lots of reasons for student absenteeism. It might be different in Brandon's community as it is in Joanna's community. It might be worlds apart on the reasons that kids aren't in school. And it can't just be teachers, school board members, and administrators solving that problem. It's going to take a lot more. It's going to take members. It's going to take law enforcement and our legal system. It's going to take the collective body and really getting kids back to school. Those are the two big things that I hear repeatedly that schools are struggling with. What are other things right now, due to the difference in how kids are now and where we find ourselves, what other things are you struggling with as school board members in your communities? Yeah, Larry.
Funding.
Funding.
The reason I'm saying that, David will take, for years I've been pushing change the SIG formula.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna
I don't
happen.
know.
I've been thinking, but there's things in the SIG formula that the state is supposed to fund 100%. Transportation,
Absolutely.
that would give us $2.4 million extra a year to give your textbooks. They don't fund that. And professional development for teachers, you talk about retention, you provide professional development. So districts on the low end of the stick, if we could get those funded, and they're supposed to by law, I'll get raise their hand about SEEK. I've done it for 14 years, but I'll find another way to get funding for the schools. That would be a logical way.
You're absolutely right. We can't do any of this without adequate funding, right? We need adequate funding for everyone. And Brian's going to talk a little bit when he gets to his presentation about the additional budget requests that the Kentucky Board of Education is supporting, including full funding of transportation. We're in a little bit better shape right now because they did put some in the last budget, but we really need it to be fully funded. And you know what that means. If it's fully funded, that frees up the resources that you're spending right now on transportation to go to other important needs. So Brian and I have been on the tour of legislators, I guess I would call it, meeting with lots of individual legislators and sharing the importance of some of the inadequacies in funding that really school districts need to be successful. So he'll share a little bit about that.
Part of that is, right now they're paying full-day kindergarten.
Uh-huh.
But it's not in the law that they pay.
It's in the budget bill, right?
It's saying they're paying, but we need it where it's permanent in the law.
I agree with that 100% and advocated for that. I will share with you that I'm not real optimistic it's going to get codified this term, but I think it'll go back in the budget bill again. So you're right. Brandon said something about leverage. I mean, we kind of know how it works, right? But I am very optimistic because the money is there. The money is in the base budget for KDE to send to you that full day kindergarten funding, but they're just not quite ready to codify it.
Yeah, they take it back in time.
Yeah. But we need to keep saying every single session it needs to be codified. It needs to be codified. A kindergarten student's just like a first grade student in terms of funding.
So
This is Carl. I have one thing I would like to ask that we are sure of when we bring somebody new in. are they aware of artificial intelligence, and do they have any concept of what that's going to do to education in the future? Because if we seem to be struggling getting where we need to be now, when things on the technological side doubles in speed, we're going to be more than just a little bit behind. We don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but it's just something that I don't think anybody's really thinking about in education, and it's going to start hitting as early as next year.
Thank you for that question, Carl, and we will definitely document that. I will share with you that there are a lot of people in education that are talking about AI right now. I went to a Council on Chief State School Officers forum a couple weeks ago, and we spent a good portion of a whole afternoon talking about artificial intelligence, sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly about it. Because there are some good things. It's just how do you make sure it's only used for good and not for the bad things. David Couch, our Associate Commissioner of the Office of Education Technology at the Department of Education, is also very much in tune with the discussions on AI and has been talking with your technology officers in your districts about AI in his regular meetings. So we will put that on the list for something that we need to make sure that our next commissioner is aware of. Thank you very much for your comment, Carl.
May I add a question as well?
Is that
This
Julie?
Yes, this is Julie. The times I've been on for the while that I've been on the local school board advisory council, we have had what I feel is a tremendous amount of turnover with commissioners, quite a number of them. And I think I'm an educator myself, and I think you need that leadership to stay for a while to really implement and really get to know our state. They might not even be from our state, but I think you need that leadership for a while. And I feel like we have not had that. So someone who's really committed to staying and seeing things through, I feel is important.
Thank you very much. I couldn't agree with you more. In the last 8 years at the Department of Education that I've been there, this last time, we've had three commissioners and 2 interims. So we know that that's not stability for any of us. Many of you may be aware that this next commissioner, there is a new legal requirement. Once the commissioner is selected by the Kentucky Board of Education, that person has to be confirmed by the Senate. This is the very first time that we've had to do that. And it does envision that commissioner could serve for up to 4 years before they would have to go through another process. I will share with you that nationally, the average sort of tenure of a chief school officer is about 4 years. So turnover is prevalent in the positions of the head of our state education agencies. I think probably gone are the days of people staying a really long time, although there are a few states that still have that advantage. So we sure hope that whoever is selected for the next one stays that full 4 years, and then that doesn't mean they have to go away. It's just that they would have to go through another process in order to stay. So my wish is for the next commissioner to be able to stay a good long time so that we can get some stability and some continuity and some momentum, because we struggle a little bit with that. It's sort of like fits and starts is what my grandmother would say, fits and starts. Are there any other people that want to talk about qualities or of our next commissioner or things that you'd like to see them do?
I do disagree with that Senate thing. I'll tell you why. That could change in 4 years with a different governor. And that's what bothers me as far as keeping someone for a long time. They may be good. One of the greatest things in the world, when a new governor comes in, he may want their own person. Mm-hmm. So, which I totally disagree with that.
So I have something, not necessarily qualities, but you brought up cell phones a while ago. When you talk about your thing. I would love to see the Kentucky Board of Education and the Kentucky Department of Education to look at the law that Florida implemented where they banned cell phones in schools. And then if you really look at Orange County, Orlando, they completely banned them completely in schools, and their bullying has dropped significantly. Their learning has risen because kids can't use their phones all day. They're literally, I mean, even if you're on lunch, oh, you pull a phone out, it's taken away. Mom and dad have to come get it. And I know our board, we would love to do it, but there's just no way we could be the only district in the state to do it. We would be crucified. So I would love to see the Kentucky Board of Education, the Department of Education, to look into that.
You know,
To see how it would affect Kentucky.
yeah, you know, it's always a delicate dance between local control and what local boards can do. Like you said, local boards could do that right now. I don't know that the state board, at least not in my interim period, they're probably not going to look at that. But certainly that could be something they could raise with the next commissioner.
I mean, even if you just looked at the statistics that's already come out from Florida, just in a year's time, actually not even a year, it's just around 3-4 months into the school year.
It also may be something, just a thought, that you could ask your superintendents to talk about in their co-op regions, because that would then allow for discussions on a regional basis with other local school districts if you're thinking you might want to go in that direction, but you feel like you really can't do it by yourself.
Yeah.
Those educational cooperatives are really good places to have those regional discussions. Might give you a little momentum behind that.
I mean, that's exactly what we're doing. I'm just trying to get everybody's, discussion started.
Yeah.
And just get it going because, I just happened to stance upon an article that I didn't even know for. I just happened upon an article and I was like, well, and I started doing a little research. I was like, this is amazing. How it's changed their education system.
Well, and thanks. It's such a wonderful technology, technical life, which I have no problem with it. But when it interferes with the teaching process for kids to learn, I know there's a school in the state that offers kids, high school kids, put their phones in a shoe carrier and gives them a point per day. Now, who would turn down? What kid would want to turn down 25 points for a month or 20 points for a month? Somebody was thinking, I was saying it was a point. There was a certain point in time where I think the phones meant what it was meant to. Like surprise. But now it's to the point where kids cheat with them, kids bully with them, and other things that we need to look about. We need to look it over. Even like you said, even if it's only a district-wise or county-wise or whatever, as opposed to statewide. Because like you said, it's going to be hard for a state board to pass anything like that. But it would be hard for county boards to pass. I don't feel like. I just think that we can manage this a little better than what we can.
Other thoughts? Other thoughts from our members on the line? Anything else to share? Well, I'm gonna stick around for the rest of your meeting and kind of listen in. We do have staff from the Department of Education that are here to talk about lots of things. Brian's going to talk to you about the legislative agenda of the department, so I'm happy to weigh in on that. And then we have Rhonda and Jennifer that are going to talk about school report card results. And then I'm sure there will be enough time for David to talk about the Kentucky United We Learn and Portraits of a Learner. We spent the majority of yesterday's Kentucky Board of Education meeting talking about United We Learn and Portraits of a Learner. And I know many of your districts you've either adopted it, you're well on your way, as in Shelby County, or you're just starting. And our goal is to really make sure that every single district and every single child has opportunities that Portraits of a Learner afford them. So looking at those skills and dispositions to make them successful in their careers, whether it's or in post-secondary education opportunities, and really make them well-rounded citizens, productive citizens for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So we had really great discussions on that yesterday, and so I'm sure David can share some of that as well. But It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I thank you very much for inviting me to come. And I just want to thank you for your service on your local school boards. I do know many times it's a thankless job, and you have to really have some tenacity about you and keep your head in the right place, that you're doing it for the students of the Commonwealth. So thank you very much for your service. And I'll turn it over next to Rhonda and Jennifer, or back to the chair, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Interim Commissioner. Our next item was given to us, and it's quite a few suggestions when we was looking at agenda items. And there was a lot of the members that wanted to hear about this, and it's on the 2023 school report card data and the assessment results.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to be with you. I'm Rhonda Sims, the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Assessment and Accountability, and I have with you a critical leader in my team. Jennifer, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon or good evening. Thank you for allowing us to come to you and speak with you and get your feedback virtually. I'm Jennifer Stafford. I'm the Director in the Division of Assessment and Accountability Support, and I get to work with my friend and colleague, Rhonda Sims.
Thank you. Well, we appreciate being with you, and it was great. It's great to see some of you again. I had the pleasure of working with Carl many years on our Kentucky the SCAC committee, Kentucky School Curriculum Assessment and Accountability Council, and I think I recognized a couple of other voices in the room. So again, it's a pleasure to be with you tonight. We did receive a question that I think was generated probably as you were thinking about your agenda, and it seems that you have kind of an interest in two sort of areas, a little bit around what are sort of some next steps around the data release and the information that is out there publicly on the school report card and things like briefing packets. And then also, I think you wanted to talk a bit about, is there a way to sort of move away, or why are we focusing on ranking schools and versus maybe being more focused on instructional kinds of issues. So that was what we gleaned from the question. And we've pulled just really 4 slides. We have some like dividers and our names and that kind of thing, but we've really just pulled together 4 content slides to kind of get us a common context with the data. We're not going to go through data slides. We'll certainly offer any sort of, if there's something we can, if there's something that we can answer for you around questions, we'll be more than happy to do that. We also can give you just some general sort of feel of what we saw in the data. We talked about that with the state board today. We're seeing more improvement in the general test results and proficiency and distinguished across the content areas at our elementary level. We see sort of more energy on recovery there that's measured through the assessment. But I will start with, even though we work with the assessment system, we see it as just really one piece of information. You have a lot more timely, rich information right there in your school system with what's occurring in your formative assessment programs, your instructional activities that are reporting back out to you as board members. So we see it as a snapshot. People many times pay a lot of attention to it because it's publicly released, but we always say it's just one piece that contributes to seeing what kind of data sources are there at the district level. And I will sort of say to you as well that when you talk about state and federal accountability, Kentucky is in a position where we're talking about a future that could be focused differently, but we still are living currently with the laws that we have in place. And there are federal requirements as well as state requirements. And so this slide kind of gives you just a little sense of that. When we talk about assessment accountability in Kentucky and at the department, we are doing only the pieces that are required in law to do. So we're not adding anything on there at KDE, but what we have either a federal or state requirement for. Now you might say, why do we care about that federal piece? And you must have a system that complies and is approved federally, or it can stop the flow of title dollars to Kentucky, or have them very restricted in their flow. So you all know, dealing with budgets and giving feedback on that at your local level, funding to move student performance, funding to just have a quality education for the kids in the Commonwealth is important. And we frankly need those federal dollars. So that's kind of the carrot for meeting federal, as well as maybe a little bit of the stick. It might be a little bit of both. And so it's important as to look at how can we pull those federal pieces in, make sure we're compliant, but then maybe how can we expand those out and push against some of those rules moving forward. So at a federal level, there's a lot of focus on how students perform in certain areas, reading and math and science. And then they want to see weights applied. They want to make sure reading and math is getting the strongest weight in the system. And you have to be able to demonstrate that. We do that through something called an overall score, where everything comes together with a weighted average. And from that overall score, we do identify for support the lowest performing schools and student groups. Now, I will say at KDE, we do not rank schools. We do not produce any kind of ranking. We don't put it out on the website, but we do have to identify for each level of school the bottom 5%. And we identify new, what's called schools around that bottom 5% every 3 years. But we also have to identify how groups of students are performing. And on our next slide in a second, we'll look at that. Now, on the state side of accountability, we have more detail in state law than we've had in my time at the department, and I've been here a long time. It has become more and more prescribed over time. At the state level, this particular statute passed in 2020, right before we shut down with the pandemic. So it passed in around February of 2020. It has taken us until this fall to get that law in place. And that was called Senate Bill 158 in 2020. There is a focus on status in the state law, the idea of how did you do in the current year, and then the idea of change. When we look at your current year and compare it back to the prior year, did you go up? Did you go down? Did you maintain? And we have to report scores for both status and change, as well as then begin to put those together in an indicator that brings together sort of 50% each of status and change. We use a little 5x5 color table to make that comparison. And then we still have to take the numbers that come out of this and do that overall score to also give it a rating and a score. So you can see there's lots of pieces. It's a very complex system. And I think that makes it very frustrating. We've tried to break it down as simply as possible as we've helped district level folks, but it is a complex system. And so I think as we hear conversation about the future, can we, encourage and interact with our legislators, work through any kind of options we might have federally for a little bit of movement, and say what could maybe change about this and maybe become a little more simplified, a little more streamlined. If we go to the next slide, I'm not sure, David, if you're running that. Thank you so much for advancing there. There are some key pieces about the reporting that, based on that little slide we just looked at, we do have to identify the bottom 5% for support. That's a federal requirement. So you see the ESSA identification again on the left. We do that every 3 years. The next time is in 2025. It also includes high schools that have a low graduation rate, below 80%. We don't have that in Kentucky. Right now, our graduation rate is quite strong in the state. With the comprehensive school and improvement, we had to calculate that this year, because once you're in that status, you can exit annually. We identify every 3 years for new, but you can come out annually. So we have to run the numbers in order to see if someone exited. The targeted support improvements, another federal requirement, that's how groups of students are performing. Are they performing as low as the same cut score for comprehensive support. And then if you remain targeted for a period of time, it's something called additional targeted support and assistance. So again, supports go up with that additional targeted. If after so many years you could move into being a CSI school because of that. This year we had 2 schools that exited ATSI status and 2 that moved into CSI status. So Kentucky reporting, on our reporting side for Kentucky, just want to highlight a couple of things that are in law. Scores are numbers. So keep that in mind. Scores are always a number. We have a score for status, we have a score for change, an indicator, and an overall. So there's lots of numbers behind the scenes. We also give levels. We have something called a level, and it's a descriptive word. Was my status very high to very low? Was my change, did I increase significantly, all the way to decline significantly? And then when we talk about a rating, we have an indicator score. When we talk about a rating, that's a color. And Kentucky uses a blue at the highest level down to a red at the lowest level. And then we have an overall score that puts all that data together with those weights. And we also put a rating on that overall score. So you can see it's very complex, lots of parts, lots of pieces. And so as we think about you as a board member, Jennifer in a second is going to talk about how we work with your district level people to help support information to you. But I think it's important that you also consider whatever comes out of this state level reporting. You also ask about what are some other sources that we can monitor how we feel about our goals and what we're doing here in our districts. So we think that this is just, again, another piece. It's a complex piece. It's lots of information. We're not doing any ranking at KDE, but we do know newspapers will do that in Kentucky. We don't encourage that. We would not say that's a great idea to do that. But it is not our goal that there be ranking of students, ranking of schools, excuse me, or districts in any way. And this really is a reporting, and requirements are around school level performance. We report the district as if you were one big elementary and one big middle and one high. For smaller districts, that means you do have just one middle and one high. But we do not really generate the data with everything combined for the district. It's all at that grade level. So Jennifer, I'll kick it to you to talk a little bit about, so I wanted to kind of handle that ranking piece. Again, we're doing, there's nothing we're reporting that we're not currently required in law to do. We're not added to any of those pieces. So Jennifer's going to talk a little bit more about your other part of your question, which was around next steps and supports, those kinds of things.
Thank you, Rhonda. In the Office of Assessment and Accountability Support, we support the work that is happening in the schools and the districts. With the release of the school report card, there actually are 2 sets of data released during that time frame. It's the assessment data and the accountability data. Now, a lot of the pieces that Rhonda just went through are about accountability. And accountability are those things that are indicators or ratings or status and change levels, and those pieces, that's accountability. For assessment data is around the student performance and how the students actually performed on the different measures of reading and math, science, social studies, and writing. So the accountability system is an important part. The assessment system is in the accountability system, but there are actually 2 different systems that we report when we open the school report card for public. So David, if you'll go to the next slide. So your second question was about the next steps. Well, in the Division of Assessment and Accountability Support, we really work with your district assessment coordinators, your building assessment coordinators, your local leaders in your districts to understand those 2 very complex systems. of both assessment and accountability. We work with them through various means. We have training materials. We have a monthly DAC webcast that is open for all of district leaders to listen into, where we provide timely, up-to-date information on all things assessment and or accountability. So we have regulations, updates. We keep our local leaders informed of what's happening at the state level and at the federal level as well when we have any new or breaking information there. We keep them up to date on changes that are happening both in assessment and accountability. If there's any statutes that could be changing or any bills that have been filed. We also have lots and lots of materials for our district assessment coordinators around all the release of the school report card. I've linked here for you specifically some training materials, as well as the accountability and data release resources. In there are a multitude of resources that can be customized by your local districts to share the information about your results. Now, each district has unique students, circumstances, and strengths and challenges. And each district needs to create their own story or their own unique circumstance and put the results in context for your parents and your educators and your local community. And what I mean by context is what's happening in your local district that could be impacting your assessment and accountability results. For example, when we were in the pandemic, schools were open and they were closed. Many school districts decided to stay closed longer. Some didn't. Some went back earlier. That had impact on our students. And so during the course of the school year, things happen and decisions are made at the local level that would impact the assessment results. Commissioner Kenny mentioned earlier staffing shortages. That's local context there. If you had an unfilled vacancy in a critical high demand area and it went left unfilled throughout the year, that could have impact on your assessment results. So that's the type of local context that we're trying to communicate around some impacts to your local district. So local districts can determine their needs and the data analysis. You may look at through a facilitation with your district assessment coordinators and your leaders in your schools and determine that there are curricular needs or there are needs for funding in particular programs. Those are the type of curricular and instructional decisions that can be made locally at the board level. David, if you'll go on to the next slide. So a few things that you may want to consider as you are looking at the data and talking about the data is that there are places that you can compare to previous years and there are places that you should not. As Rhonda mentioned, the accountability system has been in development now since 2020. With that change element, we had to have at least 2 full years of testing in order to have that change element because it's comparison back to the year before. So accountability comparisons for the 23 cannot be made to previous years. However, in our assessment data, because the test has remained the same, can be compared back to 2022. So there are places in the assessment that are very comparable, but not in the accountability system. Rhonda mentioned the indicators and those overall colors and ratings. Those mean different things this year than they did last year. So if a school was blue last year and they're blue this year, that blue doesn't mean the same thing, because last year it only had the status or that current year performance of your schools. This year it had the change as well as the status combined. So it's really a different system. And how you get to each of those indicators or each of those color ratings is very important, because there is various ways to get to that overall color of blue. So it really begs the analysis and the in-depth digging into what and how the schools got to those overall ratings. Again, the focus is on what is consistent, and that's the student performance from year to year, and the things that you can control, like those curricular decisions, or the reading program, or the math curriculum that is in your building, and the science and the instructional practices, or those innovative practices that are happening locally. As Commissioner Kenny mentioned, the portrait of a graduate that's really looking at engaging students and how to make some vibrant learning experiences. Those are the types of things that you control as a board. And Rhonda mentioned earlier that annual state testing is just one snapshot of your schools, and it's not the whole service that you are providing to your students and the community. So we really want you to look farther into the school and their programs, other than just one state test. So we encourage you to look at all of the information that you have there, because a lot of schools and districts have the formative pieces that could be very valuable in making curricular decisions. So at that point, let me stop and see if there are any questions, or if we can clarify anything for any of our members.
I'd
So-
like, if I can get a suggestion from you all on something. I understand the state assessment is we're not ranking schools, but we're putting scores on schools. But students learn at a fairly young age that these assessments don't count towards their GPA, don't give them anything to do with graduation. So especially high school students, they understand, well, we're just going to take this test, so we just go through it as fast as we can just to get through with it, because it's not going to affect their graduation, it's not going to affect their grades. But is there any way that you can, the state maybe could sit in and say, we'll give an incentive to the high school students to actually do what they're supposed to do on these tests, and that's to do them right instead of just doing them. And that hurts the scores for the school when they do that. And the alternative schools are included in the high schools. Most alternative schools are on virtual learning. They're not face-to-face with a teacher. They're doing Edgenuity, most of them are. So they're doing different programs than a student in a classroom is. So their testing is going to be different than the testing for a student that's having a teacher in front of them every day. Is there anything that KDE can offer to the schools to help incentivize these tests for the students?
You know, I can understand the issue, and this is not the first time that that we've heard something similar, David. Especially, it's how do you, not only have we talked about, we have sort of different learners. Commissioner Kenny used the phone example, which we all can relate to. We have kind of different learners. Part of that is how do you get the kids really connected so they want to do well for themselves, but they also want to show what their school can do. And that becomes, an issue of culture many times. Now, in terms of an incentive, because, kids are motivated by personal things, just like most kids are probably more motivated on the ACT if they think they might go to college, because we do administer the junior ACT and it's one measure of post-secondary. I'm not sure we have any wiggle room like within our current regulation structure. I wonder whether or not there had been any discussion of an incentive through like the KEYS money. And I don't know if Commissioner Kenny has any background on that. I do not remember that ever coming up, but I do know there's a variety of things that can sometimes yield money for students for their next step when they're going into some sort of training or some kind of post-secondary program. Not always college. That's not maybe the right choice for all students, as we all recognize, but something that is sort of a certification or a program. So when I think about incentivizing kids, I think you've got what you can do maybe in person, within the culture you're building, the positive interactions at your school. I think, though, you're saying, what could we do more on a state level that might incentivize it? And the one thing that occurred to me is whether or not we could look with our partners that handle KEYS type programs of whether there might be a way to, give some sort of credit. Jennifer may have some other thoughts that have occurred to her, but off the top of my head, that's something we may want to, we could, based on your comments today, we could certainly ask the question of that. I'm not sure how things rise to the level of earning you a little money toward your next step.
I think the other things, pieces of post-secondary are very interested for our students are very interested in that because they have some agency over which of those that they choose. Because post-secondary readiness, they can be either academic ready or career ready. And those certificates and end of program assessments that they are quite interested in, and they choose to go into those courses. I think those are where you get the higher interest of your students, especially at high school.
And I do remember several years ago, there was some conversation about linking performance on the state assessment, like KSA, Kentucky Summative Assessment, to graduation. And I think that did not move forward. There was discussion with the board. And in fact, our current state law forbids that connection. There's state legislation that says you cannot use performance on the Kentucky Summative Assessment to contribute to graduation or be the gatekeeper for graduation.
Thank you all.
Excellent question. We appreciate the conversation with it.
Anybody in the room have any? Well, Rhonda and Jennifer, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to be with the group. Obviously, David, feel free, and Jody, to pass along our contact information. And if somebody thinks of something or they have something very specific to their district they'd like us to weigh in on, we're more than happy to do that. And I know Jennifer needs to step on. I'll stay on and just be on mute if something comes up.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for your time and comments tonight.
Yeah, we'll get the slides to everybody as well.
Yes.
So.
Okay, David. The next item on the agenda is the 2023 Kentucky legislative results, election results.
If somebody wants to see a copy. So I just passed out the legislative priorities that the board approved back in the fall. We have been meeting with legislators, as the commissioner mentioned, for the past, 3 or 4 months, specifically to talk about the priorities, as well as for the commissioner just to have a chance to do some introductory meetings. So we'll just give a kind of a brief update on where we are with the priorities. I noticed on the agenda that it asked for some election results. So I think you all are all pretty familiar with how the constitutional offices played out. Pretty much on par with what we expected. The polling was pretty much dead on. What we were hearing kind of behind the scenes, you may not have heard a lot about it publicly, but the internal polls from both camps were pretty much dead on. We've been hearing 5 or 6 points for Bashir since the summer. So played out pretty much just like we thought it might. A couple other things of note. So Michael Adams was the top vote getter overall. He got more votes than anybody else. Second was Allison Ball. If you listen to any of the acceptance speeches, you may have noticed some jockeying already taking place, looking ahead to the next round of constitutional offices, but also I think a lot of people are expecting there'll be a congressional seat or two open up, potentially a Senate seat open up sometime in the foreseeable future. So lots of interesting talk there. I think you've also heard, and I keep kind of mentioning this because I think a lot of people are interested in this. You're starting to hear some folks that are, I think, again, jockeying for some position, looking ahead of some of these races, starting to talk about the need to come back to the middle, to start to moderate some of the rhetoric that we've heard the last few years around social issues, and just sort of refocus on, again, kind of a return to the middle. And so I know in education, we've been caught up in a lot of those conversations. So I'm hopeful that as we move forward, we'll start to see a little bit less of a focus on other things and more of a focus on education. So with that said, are there any questions about the election? There's not a whole lot else to mention really about the election results. So we are rolling out, we're rolling straight into the 24 elections. And just to make sure everybody's aware, in addition to the federal elections that I'm sure everybody's hearing all about, don't forget that the entire state house will be up for election, as will half the state senate. So expect to see a quarter of the house turnover. That'd be pretty much on par with what has happened the last few cycles. So quite a bit of turnover there. A lot less turnover generally happens in the state senate. You only have half up at a time, and those seats are usually a little more stable. Although there is at least one retirement that we know of so far. So we'll see what plays out, but just be aware that the entire house is up for re-election, and that's going to be the kind of the one to watch. So anyway, so that's the election. Let's talk about 24 session. Okay, so where are we? So in addition to the base budget for the department, we put in a number of additional budget requests. These span the gamut. So we sent these out to the board back in the summer and asked them to, as best they could, go through and try to rank order them. And this is really hard because they're all important, right? We're not trying to diminish anything, but we need to get to a more manageable list that folks like myself could have some idea of what they wanted to prioritize in conversations with the legislature. So they did that for us. Those are what you see on here. There are a number of other budget requests that are out there that you may hear mentioned, especially depending on your location. Some are kind of location dependent. But anyway, I just want to make sure that everybody's aware. Like, the ones on here are not the only ones. The board, we did ask them to rank order them, but that doesn't mean they're less important. These are just the ones they wanted us to talk the most about. So we did put forward an 8% increase in SEEK. This is simply tied to inflation, right? So we've been asked a few times how we came up with 8%. It's really just the inflationary number for SEEK. It does not necessarily cover all the expenses that should be covered. It's just kind of an inflationary number. We did ask for full transportation funding. I think we asked for this every cycle. They did increase it a little bit. I think it's up to 65%. Yeah, 65. So hopefully we'll see it increase a little bit. I would not get your hopes up that it'll go to 100, but maybe they'll put it at so we'll see what happens. But just know that the department is advocating for that. Universal preschool. So the board is asking for funding for at-risk 3-year-olds and all 4-year-olds. So we've had several conversations with superintendents since the fall. We have heard loud and clear that some districts are ready, willing, and able to do that. Other districts are not. We've gotten a lot of questions from the legislature about potential partnerships with local providers and how that might work. There are a few districts that are already doing that, that are already partnering with their local providers to provide preschool. So we'll see where this goes. I don't know exactly what the appetite is. A doubtful, I guess, is where I would put the needle on that one. Mason's moving on it. I think everybody recognizes the importance of getting students ready to get into kindergarten, ready to get on grade level quickly and early, so that when they get, so that third grade reading mark has become really important, I think, in everybody's mind, and everybody is starting to recognize, and I say everybody, I think the legislature is starting to realize just how important it is to get students reading on grade level by grade 3, and so that's, I think, helping kind of push some of these conversations. So we'll see where that goes. Commissioner Kinney mentioned the need for workforce, education workforce. We've been talking about this. I'm a few days away from 2 years at the department, and we've been talking about it since my interviews. Remember last session, Chair Tipton, House Education Chair, put forward House Bill 319. This was going to be a big omnibus bill related to education workforce. Got really pared down because it was a non-budget year, so a lot of things got taken out because they had dollars attached to them. We're hopeful to see some of those things get reconsidered now during the upcoming budget session. We put forward a whole bunch of essentially options that kind of span the pipeline, from getting students interested in the profession and things like Go Teach, to getting them into ed prep programs in post-secondary, getting them through ed prep programs and into the classroom, and then really focusing on supports for those first 3 years in the classroom, because we know that if they get to years 4 and 5, they're much more likely to stay till year 25, 26, 27. So that's kind of our thinking on the supports for the workforce. We've gotten quite a few questions from the legislature about these. We've gotten some additional questions. We did not put forward an APR for paid student teaching. However, we were asked to provide some options, so we did. So there's a chance that we see something happen there. I know that's been a big topic of conversation in the annex for the last year or so. So we threw out a few different options for them on that. I was very happy to see that our options ended up being right in the middle of what OEA, the Office of Education and Accountability, came out with a report, and included in that report were some numbers from around the nation about paid student teaching. The numbers we provided were right in the middle. So not the highest, not the lowest. So we'll see if that goes anywhere, but that is one of the options that I think is on the table. And I think they'll do something. What, I'm not really sure. I don't think they're completely sure yet. I think they'll see some conversations early in the session about kind of what they might end up doing. But I think they'll do at least 2 or 3. I don't know if they'll do more than that, but I think we'll see at least 2 or 3 initiatives related to the education workforce. So that's encouraging, right? So you just heard about accountability. So there is an APR out there related to TSI. So Dr. Foster and her team in the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support have been essentially piloting earlier interventions with TSI schools using some ESSER dollars, the federal dollars. And so we've really seen some success with that. They'd like to continue that and expand it. That's what that is. That ABR has been a great opportunity for us to talk more about that work. We had some good conversations Monday about that. My weeks are starting to run together. as the session approaches. So I'm hopeful that that's one that we'll really consider. It's a really good project. I'm excited that we've had a chance to talk about it. KEDS is a really big ask, both monetarily and in the way that it could potentially impact your districts. So obviously, KEDS has become more important over the years as technology has advanced. We have more programs that are virtual. We have more potential there. KEDS expanded a lot over the COVID timeframe because it needed to and had to in order to meet the demand for all those students going online. We also have a 1-to-1 device ratio with students now, so a lot more demand there. A lot more need for bandwidth, obviously, as we continue to expand. Bottom line is KEDS needs a pretty significant monetary investment. So our Office of Educational Technology has put together some information that we've been sharing with legislators. We've had meetings just with OET and legislators to talk about KEDS. I think that's one that's going to get a lot of potentially conversation in the early months of the session. Won't be surprised if they ask us to come present to a couple of the education committees or maybe even A&R committees to talk more about KEDS and about the needs. But please know that we have advocated pretty strongly for that since the summer and really tried to make the legislature aware of what KEDS is doing now, what we're providing via KEDS, and what kind of might have to go away or scale back should they not decide to fund KEDS at its current level, and giving them some options. So finally, Read to Succeed, one of the big wins coming out of last session. And so our Office of Teaching and Learning just is asking for some additional supports around Read to Succeed. We've seen, I think, some early success there, and just wanting to build off of that. Obviously, this is a big priority of both the education chairs last year, so hopeful that they'll be advocating behind the scenes for this one. So we haven't talked a whole lot about this with legislatures because we talked so much about it last session. So any questions on our ABRs? Sorry, David, before we move on.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment.
Sure.
One of these big ones on the reading deal. I don't understand why those legislators don't understand. Talk about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. If you can't read by third grade, you cannot read. You will always be behind. And I don't understand why they don't understand.
Yeah.
You know, it has nothing to do with politics.
Yeah.
It's your children we're talking about. I'm sorry, I'm preaching to the choir, I know, but I just don't get it. I don't get it.
So last session, Read to Succeed, I think really helped move that needle a little bit last session. I think they really started to understand how critical that reading benchmark is, and then sort of working their way backwards and really starting to focus on getting students ready by grade 3. We've been really encouraging them now to put Read to Succeed in place. Give us time. Like, you've got to give it some time to see the results. It's not going to be overnight. So now we're really starting to kind of push them to say, okay, give us time to show results, and let's see if this is working the way we think it is before we start monkeying more. So we'll see.
I think the other thing that has helped the conversation, reading issue, is the introduction of the program Letters. Many of your districts may be participating in Letters, which is another early reading support. We're training teachers in the Letters program, but that is being funded by federal dollars that was through COVID relief. And so we've been telling our legislators that Letters is going to go away, or the funding for Letters is going to go away. So I think that is also kind of creating a little more urgency around this issue. They see the success of Read to Succeed. We have Letters going on, and we're starting to slowly see some results. So they need to put some more cash in early literacy. They're also talking about early numeracy. So that's the next thing.
That's at the end.
But we'll get to that.
We got 2 more.
Okay, so in addition to the ABRs, we have a number of things that the board put on their priority list. So we've been, again, working hard on this stuff. So CTE funding formula. So back in the 22 session, the General Assembly almost doubled the amount of CTE funding. And that allowed our Office of Career and Technical Education for the first time ever to equalize funding across locations, right? And so the example we've been using is, in the past, a comprehensive high school A had to wait till they had 5 pathways in order to even apply to get funding for those pathways, those CTE pathways, right? So that went away. So they were able to fund all the programs. And now, all of a sudden, and in the past, a welding student at a LAVEC, an ATC, or a comprehensive high school, assuming they were funded at different levels, right? So all that went away. So now the welding student is funded the same regardless of where they are, right? Wherever they're housed, it's the same. Also, your high schools are now able to apply for funding with just one pathway. So it's a really big deal. But because of that equalization, it really set in motion the next phase, which is the distribution formula. And so the proposal that we've been working on, we've been working with Senator Gibbons in the Senate. Representative Bobby McCool will file this bill in the House for us. Right now, in the current draft that we've been shopping around, there's a 60-40 split in the pot. So 60% will be FTE based, 40% will be incentive based. The incentives are based on 4 high-quality indicators of CTE that are coming from the national level. Can't ever remember what they are off the top of my head, but it includes credentials earned. Gosh, this one blank on all of them. I'll circle back to them. They'll come to me in a second. I've said them so many times I should be able to do this. But that's a 60-40 split across all the programs, including the ATCs or locations. The ATCs will have a separate pot for their operational budget, but they will be in that 60-40 incentive pot. Likely, we'll see some winners and losers, just like we would expect. I think that overall, districts will see a slight decrease probably because we're adding in the ATCs, but relative to historical funding for CTE, it's still going to be higher. You're also probably going to see more of your comprehensive high schools be able to offer CTE and get funded for it because they don't have to get on a wait list anymore and wait for 5 programs to come online. So it's a really exciting opportunity. We've talked to a lot of legislators about this. Pretty much everybody's in support. OCTE presented to the superintendent conference here in Louisville, I guess just last weekend. Really good feedback there. So I'm feeling pretty positive that this is going to get across the finish line. I suspect that we'll see a few tweaks as we move forward. There's still a couple of wrinkles that are getting ironed out as they continue to run models. But this is one I think hopefully we see get done this session. It's a big deal for Kentucky. I think it'll make us one of the national leaders for CTE. So it's really exciting. It's one we've been working on hard since the summer. I think it's when we started really shopping this around. So it's real exciting. You see the 2 state schools there. We don't really have an ask for the state schools this year, but we have just been reminding legislators that they are out there and that they are part of, under the provision of the department. So kind of talking a little bit about those schools. So in current budget language, and so just as a quick reminder, budget language expires every 2 years. They can pretty much do whatever they want in the budget, honestly. And so sometimes they'll put things in the budget that they want to test run or that they're not ready to codify, which means to put into statute and make permanent. This is one of those things. So AP language is in the budget. Our Office of Teaching and Learning is asking for a little bit more flexibility with these dollars. Specifically, they would like for them to not roll over, so that they don't, or they want them to roll over, not expire at the end of the year. They also want to be able to use the dollars for supports around AP tests. So whether that supports for teachers teaching AP classes and getting ready for tests, or for students themselves that are getting ready for tests, they just want a little more flexibility because right now they can only spend those dollars for the exams themselves. So this would just a little more flexibility to support the students and teachers in those AP courses. So we will likely see the House budget drop the first week of the session. So again, 2022, I think Robin might know this better, or Commissioner might know this better than me. House Bill 1 was the budget. I think that was the first time that's ever happened. It came out before the budget address from the governor. So traditionally, the governor comes out in mid-January does a budget address, State of the Commonwealth address, presents their vision for the budget. That gets filed as the budget bill. The House comes in the next day or two, files their budget proposal as an amendment, so on and so forth. That all went out the window in 2022. House Bill 1, first week of the session, governor's proposal got filed as like a random bill that didn't go anywhere. It was very strange. I think that'll happen again. So the good news is we'll see a lot of where this stuff stands that first week of the session, because we'll see the House proposal. It's actually a really good thing from my standpoint. We don't have to wait around. We get to see kind of where the House is, where things are headed. So we'll see if these AP funding changes, the language is in the budget, hopefully that first week. Statutory cleanup. We have had a list kind of floating around, primarily out of the commissioner's old office, operations, finance and operations, of just some like reports that are required but not used, data collected, not used, those sorts of things. So really we're trying to think about things that would make life easier for the districts if they went away, right? And that no one would notice if they went away. So in a kind of a sign of how things are slowly improving in Frankfurt in regards to the department, we got approached by a bill sponsor that I was a little surprised at, frankly, who wanted us to review his cleanup bill language. We did, really, we're fine with it actually. But then in the course of that conversation said, oh, by the way, we have this other list of things we might want to consider. They were very open to it. We provided that list to LRC staff that are working on that draft. I've not seen a draft with that language included yet, but I'm hopeful that it will be, and I'm hopeful that we'll see that bill at least get a hearing, so at least get heard, probably in education committee, and maybe even get called on the floor. So yeah, so kind of a good one. I'm excited about that one. All right, so the last thing on the list is facilities, a couple of facilities items. Again, back to 22, House Bill 678. This was the bill that really changed or gave districts options to opt into a very different way of doing construction. It gave a lot more authority to the districts. Again, kind of thinking about red tape reduction, streamlining things from the district side. It was not called a pilot project, but it sunsets at the end of this fiscal year, so it really was a pilot project. So if folks want this to continue, it will have to be codified this session, or at least another 2-year pilot approved. Our understanding is that bill is in process. We've not seen a draft, but we've had quite a few conversations with the sponsor about this. The department is largely supportive. We're asking for 2 relatively small tweaks as they consider this. So the first tweak is that we would like some sort of training requirement for districts. We don't want those training requirements to be one size fits all. We recognize that we have some districts that do construction all the time, that have staff that could probably run the training for other districts, right? So we don't think it should be an annual one size fits all requirement. On the other end of the spectrum, we have districts that have probably never done their own construction project. And so some way of providing training to meet those different needs. Also recognizing that we'll have staff come online at different times that may need different levels of training. So we're asking for some consideration there about, as we hand over this responsibility, we would like to make sure everybody understands what they're getting into, what all the requirements are, what laws are going to have to. That's it. The second part is we would like to remove the ability to move forward with just, all right, an estimate, a bid. Yeah. All right, just make sure.
We want to make sure that there's a provision of 678 that allows districts to proceed to financing based upon an engineer or architect's estimate. And we don't think that's a good idea. And I will share with you, and many of the districts I've talked with, they don't think it's a good idea either. They're very hesitant. With the pricing of construction, labor, materials being so volatile still, it is really good for districts to have bids in hand before you proceed to your financing. So House Bill 678 allowed districts to proceed on estimates we'd like that taken out and go back to the way that you've always done it.
So those are our two requests as we consider codifying 678. Given how popular 678's been, and just based on what I've heard, I think it's very likely that this bill moves forward. So we'll see. There's a lot on the plate this session, educational-wise, as I'm sure you all are aware. So it's going to be a kind of a push to get things on committee agendas and then get called to the floor in a timely fashion. So I think this is one of the ones that they will prioritize, though, because I think districts are really happy with it. I think a lot of go back just real quick. Are there any questions about any of these? We have a pretty focused, small here. It does kind of intentional. It's been a rough couple of sessions. So I'm hopeful that this session we can work on a few priorities that are not very controversial and that have a lot of district support. So we'll see how it goes. Any questions?
So on your Kentucky State Schools,
Yes.
you also have model laboratory. I'm not who that belongs to. They're a laboratory. They're just kind of out there on their own. But I know last budget, they were put in for money to build a new school. Well, since everything's changed, they don't have enough. So I know they're legislating for more money. So that'll be a big push.
That's a president time question.
Yeah. But, you know,
So we don't
we're
have-
kind of out there, they're, you know.
You're the only one that has to worry about something like that,
Yeah.
Brandon.
We got a laboratory school in the state, and we got a ton of charter applications in the state, so.
Madison County is very special, aren't you? Yeah.
I was at EPA for 5.5 years.
So, but I do know.
We don't have, the department has no responsibility over model.
Okay. So yeah, it's one of those, it's.
Now, they do receive some funding through
Yeah,
us,
it's
right? And they
because
have
they
their,
used to pass through
Yeah,
us.
and they have their own statutory authority.
Yeah.
Yes.
How about SRO offices?
So that's a good question. We've not, it comes up. So here's the answer that I usually give people. When you start talking about either an SRO, a nurse, or a mental health professional, you end up talking about all three, right? Because I think it's unlikely that you will see them approve one of those for every school or every building or every campus, which all have different numbers attached to them. But they're all really big numbers. But one of those, just one of those three in every, again, campus, building, however you want to do it, it doesn't matter, it's a really big number. When you put all three together, it's a enormous number on an annual basis. I think that makes it really difficult for them to fund any of those. I think that you saw the SRO requirement, which is, yes, put an SRO if funding's available. And if not, here's how you get around it. So I think if you see the other two get done right now, it's likely going to be the same situation. And I think it's literally just it's a math problem.
Yeah, because they mandate it, when you mandate it, it just can't afford it.
That's why they always spend the funding's
Where did
available.
you find them?
Where do you find them?
Yeah, well, that's the second part of the problem, right? Is
Yeah.
all those areas are high demand fields that have because of the private sector pulling those folks away to higher paying jobs. So, but yeah, I think it's largely just math. I don't think there's any. You'll find a few people in Frankfurt that are going to say any of those three are unnecessary. Now, I think that you can have some creative solutions to some of those. So Ken Fleming, Representative Fleming from here in Louisville, I can't remember what the bill number was off the top of my head last year, but he sponsored a bill to bring the Safe Utah Act, or a version of what the Safe Utah Act is, to Kentucky. So Utah introduced this act a few years ago, and it allows for access to mental health professionals real time via the phone, via the app. And so he was bringing that here in partnership with U of L and Peace Hospital. So the idea, I think, was to put a group of mental health professionals that were staffed around the clock at Peace Hospital, and then students and staff or whoever could access those folks via that. So I think you may see some creative solutions like that, which has a much smaller number attached, as opposed to putting a physical person in every single location around the state. I think that bill got out of the House pretty easily, but ran into some questions in the Senate. I'm trying to remember all this off the top of my head, sorry. But I'm pretty sure it got out of the House, but then there was some pushback in the Senate. I'm hopeful, just personally, we haven't really talked about this at the department level, but I'm hopeful to see it introduced again, just because I think that, you know, for a lot of our rural districts, it'd be a good step forward. You know, a 5-year-old daughter, and so I keep, you know, thinking about, you know, as she gets older, I think the digital realm will be more of even a native space for her than it is for someone in their 20s now. So I think looking ahead, something like that, you know, sorry. So that's kind of where we are on that.
As I listened to all of this, the question is how unified are all of the education groups with these priorities? Because we're so much stronger together than we're coming in from other things to try to.
That's a great question. So we've tried to have conversations with a lot of folks, not just legislators, but with some of the K groups. So like OCT was here last week talking to the superintendents about the CTE distribution. We had lots of conversations with folks like me that work with the K groups. Back today, I was talking to one of them saying we need to start getting kind of more organized and have weekly meetings during the session. I came from the post-secondary side, do the same thing. So the post-secondary side, called the group of biennial university legislative liaisons. So we met weekly. So I'm trying to sort of wrangle the group together to say, okay, let's get together weekly to get on the same page and make sure that at least a few of these things we can try to really push a unified voice on. Some things I think are unfortunately getting funding for SROs and really a much bigger hurdle than, say, fixing CTE distribution, which doesn't cost anything. We've already funded it. We're trying to fix the distribution. But yeah, it's good. It's a great point. It's definitely on the radar. We're actually just talking about today, so hopefully we will have some sort of like at least bi-weekly meeting during the session where we can kind of wrangle everybody together, go through the bill chart. That's a good question. Anything else about our priorities, other priorities? So just a couple of things to expect from the General Assembly. I think it's highly probable we will see at least, I'm going to say 3 House bills, 2 Senate bills on DEIB. I think at the end of the day, they will say that if you're a state agency, you do not have a DEI office, something to that effect. We'll see where it goes. I don't know.
That's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Sorry, I got talking back.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
The commissioner got ahead of me and already mentioned numeracy. So we have had conversations throughout the summer and fall about a numeracy bill that would sort of mirror Read to Succeed. So focused on early grade interventions. It will not overlap with Read to Succeed, so we're being very cognizant of keeping the burden off of the same groups of teachers. So it'll be a little different in that regard, so a slightly different group of students, but same idea. I think that I've seen a draft bill, but I'm not sure exactly what it's been finalized yet. But I do think that this will get introduced and probably get some traction this session. Early literacy continues to be a big topic of conversation. You saw RABR. I don't know if we'll see any other things introduced around early literacy. There's also a lot of questions about the connection between early literacy and the Ed Prep programs. This coming Monday, there's a specially called Interim Joint Committee for Education or on Education. Chair Tipton called that meeting or requested that meeting. One of the items specifically to ask the Ed Prep programs, I think, how are they getting teachers ready to teach this new way of early literacy? Or the new science of reading.
Science of reading.
Science of reading.
Yeah.
So tune in Monday, 9 a.m. We're on the agenda as we always are for education committees, but you'll also see a couple of the Ed Prep programs present, I think, on this connection to some of these early literacy initiatives. Any other questions about things to expect? There'll be lots more bills, but, a lot of the usual stuff. I do think the temperature as it relates to education has come down noticeably since last year. Like the commissioner said, we've had a lot of meetings this fall with folks in the annex. They've been largely productive. We've had a lot of good conversation, a lot of recognition of moving forward and getting back to some sort of better working relationship. So hopefully if that's the case, we'll see proofs in the pudding. So we'll find out January 2nd how things are going. So questions? Well, thank you all. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm in Frankfurt every day, so if you're ever around, say hi.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we're going to table the last item on the agenda till next time because with our odd sort of schedule that we have, we see you guys really actually pretty quickly again. We do December, February, and then we go a long time. So we'll do our Portrait of a Learner, that sort of conversation at our next meeting and probably go a little bit deeper into it than I would have been able to go tonight anyway. The board met in the last couple of days on the Portrait of a Learner. We now have 97 districts who are either already in the Portrait of a Learner, like Shelby County, or developing one or started developing one. So it's a thing that's gaining its momentum on the ground, which I think is the way it should be done. I only will say one thing about Portraits of a Learner, and I heard this from a superintendent at LSAC, is I love the way he said it. He said, here's how I think about Portrait of a Learner. It's not additional to Brandon's comment about standards. He said the standards are what we have to teach. The portrait's how we teach it. The portrait gives us all the opportunities that allow for deep introduction of the standards to kids and gives us a broader spectrum. So don't think about it as, oh, it's another thing we're going to make people do. It's just a different way of thinking about it. So anyway, we'll talk a lot about that in February. If you have other items that you want on the agenda in February, send them to Chair Webster and get them on the agenda.
He heard you.
Thank you all so much for being here. Yeah, Alec. Felix.
February meeting,
Yes.
the KSBA is not meeting.
Yeah, that's the winter, that's the annual conference of KSBA.
It's on Saturday that you got down.
Oh, is it? Okay.
That's,
For the next two, it's on Saturday.
Oh, is
KSBA
it?
is meeting in March, not February.
It's backed up a week.
Oh, it is. So I just have the wrong date. That's the date they sent us. Just remember that. We'll get that something out to correct that to you, but just always,
Thursday night is actually February the 29th.
okay,
Conference is.
leap day.
Yeah.
That's where we're going.
First, second, third.
Okay, so just always remember that our meetings will be Thursday night before whatever conference it is that y'all are having, whether it's leadership or this conference or that. We'll get the date right, but
Got a little ways to travel in July.
yeah.
Bowling Green.
All right. Thank you all again. Enjoy the conference and happy holidays. Merry Christmas.